Evening.
On a stretch of the Dorset coastline inside a restaurant in Lyme Regis, a special event is underway. For most of the past 14 years, the Oyster and Fish House has been owned and run by the chef Mark Hicks. And like all good restaurants, this is a place where stories are told, memories made, you could even say legends.
Didn't Keith Floyd have his last dinner here?
He went to the doctor's at lunchtime, just before lunch. I think he had a problem with his ticker. And he had lunch with his producer,
David
Pritchard. Sadly, he went home and watched himself being interviewed by Keith Allen.
Yeah.
And he died whilst he was watching it.
The following day, newspapers reported that Floyd's last meal consisted of oysters, potted shrimp, toast and a partridge. The reason these stories are being shared again is because the Oyster and Fish House is closing and people are saying goodbye to Mark Hicks as a restaurateur.
So, this is the Last Supper. You have to feel sorry for anything.
Also at the Last Supper is food writer Tom Parker Bowles, a long-time admirer of Hicks and his cooking.
What you're talking about is someone who quietly and gently in the kitchen reinvented the idea of British food. Mark is a purist. For all his laid-backness, he's a purist of the very finest kind.
It's getting tougher and tougher and tougher. You know, the problem is after the pandemic, the whole restaurant industry completely changed. From a business point of view, you know, people weren't going out as much. A lot of the staff that were in the industry became Amazon drivers or whatever. So it's very difficult getting the staff, number one, to work and then to get experienced staff. Yeah, it was hard and unusual, but it was almost, I suppose, survival, really. Because what else could I do apart from cooking and doing restaurants?
In this programme, we'll be hearing why the restaurant industry says there are tougher times ahead. Why there are fears that Mark Hicks's decision to close is just a taste of more to come. And if that is the case, why should we care?
Now I would definitely never even tell my enemy to open a restaurant, a small restaurant. If I had one, that is,
So what you're going to find in this country is you're going to have pizza restaurants, you're going to have centralised kitchens with no real chefs on site. You're not going to get proper restaurants.
The restaurant industry has been through tough times over many years. Brexit brought skill shortages, COVID closed doors, global events drove food price inflation, which took us into a cost of living crisis. And then in November came the budget, and the industry said enough. A few days after the Chancellor announced tax rises, the organisation which represents the restaurant sector, UK Hospitality, sent a letter to the Treasury. Changes to national insurance contributions alongside an increase in the national minimum wage will cost businesses at least $3.4 billion a year, it said. The organisation added it understood the fiscal and economic challenge the government faces, but said, and I quote, "The UK has among the highest minimum wages, VAT rates and business property tax levels in the world." One of the authors of that letter is Alan Simpson, Deputy CEO of UK Hospitality.
You can go down a list. So business rates have gone up by about £500 million just for hospitality. National insurance contributions for employees are going to go up for hospitality by at least £1 billion. The minimum wage is £1.9 billion more. So that's 3.4 billion just with those three policies. The Employment Rights Bill, the government estimates, is another £500 million for the sector. So you're at the best part of £4 billion of cost in 1 week alone. And that's a lot of money for any business, particularly businesses which traditionally are quite low margin.
The national minimum wage is going up next year to £12.21. Are you saying that increase shouldn't be happening?
My own personal view is that the minimum wage is a non-negotiable. It's a really important social thing. The question is its affordability. And when at the same time national insurance contributions have gone up, inflation remains high, it's the affordability of the minimum wage rather than the minimum wage itself, which is worrying businesses.
So what do you think the impact is going to be?
We saw quite a strong Christmas last year. We think this year the forward bookings look really very good. The worry actually is about next year. Right now, things look as if they're on the verge of recovering, and most analysts are expecting the hospitality sector to grow at about 6% year on year in the next 2 or 3 years, which is rather higher than the rest of the economy. But all of that is put at risk by the budget.
In its response, the Treasury told us, and I quote, "The government has delivered a once-in-a-parliament budget to wipe the slate clean, deliver the stability businesses so desperately need," and that the Office for Budgetary Responsibility says that in the round, the budget delivers lower unemployment and higher wages over the coming years. The Treasury also told us that more than half of employers will either see a cut or no change in their national insurance bills, and employers of lower paid employees will typically pay less per employee. Without our action, the Treasury goes on to say, business rates relief for retail, hospitality and leisure would have ended next April. Instead, there's a 40% relief for 250,000 properties being extended. And because hospitality matters, they say, we are introducing a permanent, new, lower business rate in 2026. But it's not enough, says Alan Simpson of UK Hospitality.
The Chancellor is in an incredibly difficult position. I think we all recognise the fact that she does legitimately have to find a very significant amount of money. The reason the levers that she pulled were, to my mind, so unwise is three fundamental reasons. The first one is that hospitality, accommodation and food pay 66% of their pre-tax profits in tax. That is the largest of any other sector and more than twice, for example, what the city pays. That's the first reason. Second reason is that hospitality is a uniquely important social employer. It's the largest employer of non-graduates, largest employer of young people, largest employer of people across the country in terms of geographical dispersal. It is the only route for a lot of people into skilled employment and management. And then the third thing is that it's how we fix our cities. You go to places like Folkestone on the south coast or Manchester in the 90s, and it's hospitality that transformed those communities. And you very fundamentally don't get that unless you support hospitality. So yes, there are places that you can spend your limited tax envelope to support higher productivity sectors, but there's absolutely nowhere you can spend it in a way which has the same amount of social fairness.
In this programme, we'll be hearing from real insiders, people who own or have owned restaurants and people who've built up restaurants from scratch, not only to gauge the mood of the industry, but also to hear about some of the ways in which restaurants are already adapting to give them a better chance of survival. But first, let's go back to Mark Hicks, whose own career, spanning 4 decades, charts the complete transformation of restaurants in Britain, a period in which the number of restaurants quadrupled. Mark went from cooking classes at school to catering college, started working in restaurants in the 1980s, became a head chef in London in the 1990s, and then saw the chance of a breakthrough.
A phone call from my fishmonger, Tony Allen, and he said, look, there's a job at the Caprice going. And I'd sort of vaguely heard of the Caprice, didn't know much about it. So I went for about 4 interviews with Chris Corcoran and Jeremy King. You know, Chris and Jeremy sort of taught me about cooking what the customer wants to eat, not what you want the customer to eat. And then they opened the Ivy and then wanted me to sort of oversee the Caprice and the Ivy. And, you know, and then we opened Jay Shiki, which became the sort of best fish restaurant in London, and I think probably still is. And then thought, you know, it's time to do my own thing, really.
Why?
Well,
Because in a sense, there you are at the cutting edge of London.
I wish I had now. Well, I wish I had, but I suppose really, yeah, it was cutting edge. It was a great job, but I just think I wanted a little flavour of something, you know, for myself.
Yeah.
The first site was the old Rudland and Stubbs site in Smithfield Market. And that became Hicks Oyster and Chop House.
More London restaurants followed, including Hicks Soho and the Hickster Bankside. And these were heady days. Take the opening of Hicks's Tram Shed, a huge site in East London.
So I'd known Damien Hirst for years, and I just sent him a message during a site meeting. I said, listen, I need something from my new chicken and steak restaurant. 2 days later, he sent this image of a cow in formaldehyde with a chicken on its back. So So we went to town on that, and that became the sort of centrepiece of the restaurant, if you like. Every time you open a new restaurant, that became your favourite restaurant. And I think I probably went one step too far looking back on it. Maybe I should have just had 2 restaurants, but at the time, you know, you're kind of driven and you've got all these ideas, and you can't always do those ideas in 1 restaurant or 2 restaurants.
By 2020, Mark was working with a team of investors who'd bought into the restaurants, which were now losing money.
My landlord in Soho put the rent up overnight almost, from 250,000 to 500,000
a year. Yeah.
So that was kind of the starting point, really, because we weren't even making 250,000 bottom line. And when the landlord doubles your rent, you know,
it's almost like cancelling out.
Yeah, you've also got to take £1 million to pay that extra 250 rent, which is not doable. You know, suddenly making an extra $1 million. So
because of all the tax, VAT, and
yeah, exactly, and the costs. So. Yeah, then we did start to struggle a little bit with rent hikes and stuff. And in hindsight, I couldn't have survived through the pandemic anyway. So it was probably the right thing to do. It's just sad to lose all the restaurants and have to make 135 staff redundant.
Yeah.
One time I actually, I quite like telling this story, because they had to buy my name as well in order we could operate the restaurants with Hicks above the door.
Hicks was the brand. You lost your name?
Yeah, so I lost my name when it went into administration, and I suppose I started planning without the use of my name. So when I managed to buy the Oyster and Fish House, Hicks Oyster and Fish House back, I had to call it the Oyster and Fish House. Yeah. I brought it back, my name, off the administrators for like 7,500.
How were you feeling?
Yeah, a little bit bruised. I wanted to get back on my feet. I wouldn't let, what happened get me down. I wanted to just keep soldiering on. I bought a truck on eBay that had been converted. When I bought it, I thought to myself, I haven't got a job, I haven't got a business.
I haven't got my name.
I haven't got my name anymore. I haven't got any staff. So I was sat up there with a bottle of wine on my iPad looking through eBay. And I thought, food truck.
Back in Dorset, he used the truck to sell fish for the local fishermen who were also struggling to make a living through the pandemic.
I had my head chef from the fish house, Jez, helping me on the truck because obviously, no one had any jobs. And then I always remember the first week, I think we had like 300 quid cash after paying the fishermen and paying the weekly rent on the car park space. So I just divvied it out between Jez and myself. And it was working a bit like that. There was no financial element of, we sold this much fish, we got loads of cash and we're going to make some money. It wasn't. So, and then quite often we'd sit outside the pub on the harbour and spend a good part of our weekly wages. But during that time, I had to take out all of my life's pension because none of us knew how long it was going to last for, this thing. So I took out all of my pension. I wasn't getting a salary anymore. I still had 2 mortgages to pay. And there was no way really of, recouping that money. So I could only see the money I'd taken out of the pension. I had to sell a few bits of art. It was just going, my bank balance was just going down and down and down all the time. And then obviously, things got back to, semi-normal.
Yeah. In buying back the Oyster and Fish House from the administrators, Mark was back up and running as a restaurateur, but finding staff was a challenge, and the budget, he says, was the last straw.
I think unless you're a cash-rich restaurant or a large group that can sustain it, I think it's going to be very, very tough. Or if you're a husband and wife scenario running the place. I wouldn't, going back, I wouldn't ever change what I've done. So I've gained a lot of experience, had great fun, because a lot of the hospitality business is great fun.
Yeah. During those periods that you've just been describing, how much stress were you under?
Yeah, enormous. I think different people take stress on board slightly differently, don't they? Some people have breakdowns, or some people go to the bottle, take drugs. I suppose I've managed my sort of stress levels quite well over the years. Really, never really let it get me down.
Mark Hicks, who's still cooking. He now holds pop-ups in his Dorset home, cooking for 8 people at a time. Another pioneer who went from being a chef to setting out on his own is Cyrus Todiwala. After more than 30 years of running his own businesses, he's also considering his future.
It's become, wow, I can't even explain it, but it's become, time has come when we are seriously concerned. Let's put it that way. And it's come to a stage whereby which it is futile, because you put in 16, 17 hours of work a day. I start very early. I have to put in because I cannot employ more people anymore. I am looking for somebody. Of course, that skill is not there out there to access even. But to employ means to add another burden onto my bottom line or our bottom line. And that, of course, impacts on all of us. And it's come to that stage where you are only fighting to pay the bill, the taxman. You're fighting to pay your landlord. You're fighting to pay your staff wages. But you're not fighting to pay yourself. Yeah, I'll give you an example. I've got a car which is very badly banged up. I can't afford to replace my car.
Your business survived the pandemic, Cyrus, but what's been the legacy?
People are so used to ordering food at home, which is why the delivery companies are seeing an accentuated result year on year on year. And people are happy to order food in that could come from a kitchen where they have no idea. They have no idea at all what the hygiene standards are, what the physical values are. They have no idea, but they are so used to pressing a button and getting food delivered within minutes that the thing has set in. It's like a curse, rather, that why should I go out when I can have the food delivered to me? Suddenly, everything has skyrocketed, and how can we survive when everything skyrockets and we still have to keep a decent price? And then people complain that our menus become expensive now. Where do we go? Do I buy rubbish all the time and serve? I cannot. I have a conscience. I cannot buy rubbish.
Both Mark Hicks and Cyrus Todiwala are chefs who built up restaurant businesses. I wanted to hear the views of someone who'd entered the hospitality world through a different route, someone who'd opened restaurants as something of an outsider. And for that, I visited a site on the outskirts of Cheltenham, a place where cider is made.
We make cider in the old-fashioned way, where it takes a year to produce the cider. It's a blend of single apple varieties.
This is Julian Dunkerton, and in a production room there are rows of tall stainless steel tanks in which the cider is fermenting.
My father and my stepmother moved to Herefordshire when I was, I think about 14 or 15. Realised, I think, very quickly that to make a living they needed to do something more than a small holding. So they started Dunkerton Cider about 40 years ago, I think. And I took it over with my business partner, Bean, over there. But yeah, it's a labour of love. It's a wonderful thing. We're very proud of the product.
But most know Julian Dunkerton's name because of another business he founded, a fashion brand which, at its peak, was valued at more than £1 billion. Superdry.
I left school at 18, not with brilliant A-levels, and I don't know if you remember the enterprise allowance scheme. £40 a week. I don't think Mrs. Thatcher understood quite what she created, but it was an incredibly useful tool to get young people into starting a business. It really did help. The sort of regularity of the £40 rather than any kind of lump sum as a grant really made a fundamental difference to my starting in business.
Which was his first fashion business.
Sold that business, got in a car, drove around until I found Cheltenham, and I thought, this is it, I'm staying here. I've fallen in love with the town, I've fallen in love with the architecture, and this is the place for me. Small enough to be friendly and big enough to be interesting is how I always describe it. I love it here, I really do.
So that's the backstory of that business. How would you describe your relationship or kind of interest in food as you were growing up?
So my stepmother would be very pleased for me to say that her cooking was so good that my love affair with food, really started at home. And then we travelled a lot. We went to France. I'm actually a quarter French, so that helps. So food was really very much part of my upbringing.
Around a decade ago, Julian Dunkerton entered the restaurant world with the Lucky Onion Group and had a combination of town centre and village pub sites.
Look, I had the fortune of being able to build businesses that were good for Cheltenham and then work out the economics afterwards. All right, so I'm in that lucky position.
So after years in the fashion business and now with insights into hospitality, how does Julian Dunkerton see the future of restaurants?
Hospitality done properly is an incredibly labour-intensive and low-margin business. And you are really working on sort of wafer-thin end results. So what you're going to find in this country is you're going to have pizza restaurants, you're going to have chain stores that have kitchens elsewhere, centralised kitchens with no real chefs on site. You're not going to get proper restaurants because they are labour-intensive and very hard to make work. Why do you think that is? And what do we have to do as a society to make this better and to make sure that these restaurants stay open and proliferate and grow and give the next generation a chance to open a restaurant and make it work? Because like I said, the quality of life for this nation is dependent on a good local pub. It's dependent on a good local restaurant. So let's support them and let's think about what we need to do. And I can tell them it's reduced VAT to 10% immediately.
You're saying that this is many years of pressure on hospitality. This isn't just about the recent budget.
No, this is many years. Now, look, nobody minds, the minimum wage going up. That's a wonderful thing to aspire to as a nation, but you've got to go hand in hand and realise the implications. And therefore, if you're raising more money on one side, for goodness sake, make sure that you've understood the ramifications, the implications, and you deal with the problems the other side. And hospitality is one of the most labour-intensive businesses on the planet. So let's take them as a special case, like the film industry is taken as a special case. We know how to take certain industries and support them. Let's make hospitality one of those.
And for people who don't understand the business, what difference could 10% VAT make to a pub or a restaurant?
Survival. You have to remember we are competing with food that is at home, non-vatted. So just the fact that you're eating food in a restaurant, it suddenly becomes vatable at 20%. So the discrepancy between your perception of value is distorted.
Julian Dunkerton still has traditional restaurants in the town centre, but on its outskirts, he's developed a completely new model. On a former industrial estate, there's now a large covered space in which Cheltenham's restaurants can have a presence inside a food court.
Do you know what? I bought this whole brownfield site because this is the last beautiful entrance to Cheltenham and I wanted to protect it. And then I thought, okay, I'll bring the cider here. And then I thought, okay, I'll develop the site into a kind of event space and then a food court and then a farm shop and then... So it developed into this, I don't know, I call it a thing really. It's a unique experience. Mm-hmm. It's loved by everybody. It's incredibly popular. Mm-hmm. So I bring in independent businesses into the environment and we all work together. So whether you're Filipino food or the food, West Indian, the food offering here is quite phenomenal. And people just love it. You can come here and it's you can have Mexican, dim sum. I mean, there's such a choice. There's something for everybody here. So there are other food courts in the world. We're not unique in that, but we are unique in how we've put it together. It's just a wonderful place to come together, and a family can come here and each can eat something different. That's what's saying, and it's multi-generational. Everybody loves it here.
How many people do you expect to come through here a week, roughly, just to get people?
It's actually tens of thousands.
Creating something of an ecosystem of restaurants, a group of food businesses connected in some way that becomes a destination, is well established. Think of Rick Stein and Padstow. As a business model, it can also offer safety in numbers. But someone who's taken that idea further than most is Simon Rogan, whose cooking roots go back to his childhood.
My father was a fruit and vegetable salesman, so he used to bring home lots of ingredients as part of the perks of his job. More often than not, didn't know what to do with them. because they're all weird things, like what I'm talking back in the day, like mangoes and pawpaws, like, well, what the hell are they? What do you do with that? So got that inquisitive nature of a cook.
Simon worked in a Greek restaurant in Southampton, started an apprenticeship in the New Forest, then worked under some of the UK's best-known chefs, including Marco Pierre Waite. Then he decided to relocate to Cartmel in the Lake District, where he opened L'Enclume.
You know, we ended up selling, obviously, our house, our car, our stereo. We sold everything we owned to open this beautiful restaurant in the Lake District. And thankfully it worked out. And you know, we funded the whole restaurant without any big borrowings or investors. You know, we invest money when we have money.
L'Enclume is now one of the few 3 Michelin star restaurants in the UK, along which, also in and around Cartmel, are other Rogan restaurants and food businesses. Combined, they employ more than 200 people. And with his eye on the long term, Simon Rogan has created a hospitality talent pool in the northwest of England by founding a training academy.
Trying to, you know, get youngsters and bring them into the industry and give them something really attractive, make it easy for them, give them a qualification and bring them into an environment where you can see that hospitality is a trade. You know, it's had such a bad reputation over the years as horrible places to work. You know, no parent would want their child to go into hospitality. You know, aggressive, violent, low paid, hot, dirty, long hours. Yeah, nothing really good to say about it, really. I mean, I don't know why I chose it, really, but I was in love with what I was doing, and I was determined to get to the end of it all. But yeah, it's not had a great reputation, so we wanted to show people that this was an art form. This is an industry. You can travel the world, you can meet amazing people, you can earn good money now. The hours are nowhere near as bad as what they were, and obviously kitchen environments, restaurants, a lot more better environment to work in now.
And Rogan's business model has an additional feature that most restaurants don't have: a farm.
My name is John Rowlands. I've been gardening as an hobby since I was 8 years old. And yes, I've spent a lifetime just working in the countryside.
And I can tell from your accent that you're not from Cumbria.
No, I'm from South Wales. Born and bred, a little place called Llanghaina. Little valley, more churches and pubs in the valley I come from.
And what brought you up here, John?
Simon was looking for a gardener. I was self-employed at the time, doing a lot of gardening around Castlecombe in Wiltshire. It's all about real food, real taste. You know, it's when you buy a carrot from a supermarket, there's no smell to it. When you put a carrot to the ground here, you can actually smell it. You know, the taste is phenomenal, and that's what Simon, I think, is all about, is giving real taste of real food to his customers and grown in the right way as well.
And did he say how much of a range he wanted?
This field particularly, when I first arrived here, I planted 10,000 cabbages in here, and it done really well. Last year we had runner beans, peas, broad beans, and onions, which were red Baron onions, varieties Simon actually wanted. I couldn't get. So
he specified the varieties.
He specifies the varieties because, you know, you can get 40 more different types of cabbages. Simon actually comes up for a stroll around the farm with me every Tuesday morning. Something is just finishing, and then something then will be starting, and he'll make up a dish for that. He knows it's going to be happening in 2 weeks' time. Yeah. So something will finish, something will start. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The idea is for us is to make the farm actually pay for itself. So we're not worried, about making massive profits. We just want it to pay for itself, and we want to put fantastic food on the plate.
You know, it's financially got to make money for us now, and it is feeding quite a big organisation as well. So we are pretty much self-sufficient. There's not much that we buy. But following the budget, Simon Rogan believes more innovation and more change lies ahead for the industry. There's many little facts and figures, but I think the ENI rise alone is going to add another $500,000 in cost to our business. So where's that going to come from? You know, we don't make £500,000 profit every year, you know, and why would we want to wipe out that profit anyway, just for an NI rise? So that money's got to be found by cutting costs, either cutting, or we will never cut staff, but we will wait for staff to leave and then not replace them. But that's not the attitude. That's not how we've run things over 22 years. We always want to be proactive and be seen as an aggressive employer that is always well staffed and got the tools to do the job. So the only place that I can see that being raised is by passing the costs on to the customer, like many other businesses are going to have to do. We're going to have to raise our prices, and it's something that we don't want to do, but where else is the money going to come from?
All of the people in this programme believe restaurants of all kinds add more to British life than economic growth. They're part of our culture, places where we celebrate and make memories. Over to two people who've created restaurants for just that reason. Imogen Waite, who, along with her partner Kieron, opened a restaurant in Bristol 13 years ago, to which they've added 3 more, all in the city. And the first, Bravas, is on its way to becoming an institution.
We lived above it at the time in a tiny little flat, which is now the office and storeroom, and worked every shift. Kieron was behind the bar, I was in the kitchen, and essentially we just loved the culture of eating in Spain and the sort of relaxed way in which you can get tapas, which is completely unpretentious but really, really high quality. So we wanted to recreate that atmosphere and the sort of connection that you get with people in a tapas bar, that you can sit around a bar, meet the person next to you. And at the time, there wasn't really anything like that in Bristol.
I've always just got a massive kick of satisfaction about seeing somebody come in, have a small glass of beer and a slice of tortilla and spend like £7 and be able to do that. And on the same day, somebody can be having a really big birthday there and spending quite a lot more. So I think the way you can choose with small plate restaurants how to balance a meal and where to spend your money gives it some flexibility.
I decided at 18 that running a restaurant was what I wanted to do, and so I set about equipping myself essentially. So I went off to work in kitchens specifically so that once I'm in the sort of position that I'm in now, I know what's going on in the kitchen, so I can talk to the chefs and speak to them about what's going on.
We've had COVID, food price inflation, and we've had a budget. How does it look and feel to you now?
It is a real challenge for small independent businesses, but I think there's also the value that we add as businesses and the uniqueness of the experience that you get in a restaurant, and in a world that is moving away from real human connection and away from experiences in person. I think the value of what we offer is becoming greater. And what we're trying to build with our businesses is institutions. So we want to make places that people celebrate their 16th birthday and then they come back and celebrate their 50th birthday. And that's our sort of long-term, like what we're looking for. And restaurants do that. You get restaurants that will outlive us and that people will keep going to. And so I think we take a long-term view on things, and there is going to be lots of bumps in the road, but what we talk about as our mission as a company, it comes from someone who used to work for us many years ago, a great Spanish guy called Julio. And when you would ask Julio, what he was deciding to do about something, and he would have this sort of relaxed way, and he would say, I'm going to go to the pub this evening. What is this life? And what is this life? It's basically, what is there that is more important than connecting with people over a table, than seeing people in person, having meaningful relationships, meaningful experiences and interactions. We can all sit at home staring at a box every night and not interact with each other, but we're not really going to remember that when all is said and done. I think what happens in restaurants and across the table, that's like making memories and living life and meeting people. It's important and it matters because it's what who doesn't like it? Like, who doesn't want to go out for dinner and have a nice time and enjoy life? Like, that's what it's all about. It's what we all work hard for, so that we can enjoy ourselves and have a nice time.
But the last word goes to Hugh Corcoran. His restaurant, the Yellow Bittern near King's Cross, is only 6 weeks old, but it recently became one of the most talked about restaurants in the country. Not so much because of the food Hugh cooks or the fact that it only opens for lunch Monday to Friday and you can only book by phone or by sending a postcard, but talked about because of what Hugh has to say about restaurants. all sent out to the world in an Instagram post. And it's a message to us diners.
Before coming to live in London, I'd lived in Europe for 10 years. And in particular in the Basque Country for 6 of those years, and then later on in Paris. And I suppose I learned to cook in the Basque Country. I learned what restaurants meant to me in the Basque Country. I think before, when I lived in Ireland, I didn't really spend a lot of time in restaurants, and I still don't want to go home. I mean, our thing is pubs, or bars as we call them back home. But going to the Basque Country, I kind of realised how convivial restaurants can be, and I spent a lot of time eating and drinking in places that were extraordinarily casual, places which remained restaurants and places to go and eat, but that were owner run, and the owners kind of jotted down a menu that they were going to do that day. To be honest, they didn't even do the chalkboard. I mean, they didn't do any sort of menu. They would just come to the table and say, "I've cooked this today. Is that all right with you?"
With that as his inspiration, and with 2 partners, Hugh opened the Yellow Bittern, but quickly realised some of the people filling the 18 seats didn't share his vision, and so he posted on Instagram.
I made what became seen as a very controversial post on social media, which at the time I didn't think was much more controversial than many other things I've said on social media in the past. But I suppose I happened to be picked up at a certain moment by a certain crowd, and then it kind of exploded beyond what beyond what it merited, because at the end of the day it was a pretty banal comment about how if you want to come to this restaurant, or any restaurant really, you should be in, there's a certain etiquette is what I was getting at, or an unwritten rule, if you like, or there was a set of manners that when you go to a restaurant, you intend to order some food, drink some wine, all these things. If you come to a restaurant because you would like to be in that room, but you're not necessarily want to eat or drink, it's kind of a waste of our time, it's a waste of your time, and that's not what we want. We want people to come here with an attitude of abandon, an attitude of indulgence, an attitude that, at the very least, an attitude that I'm going to have a main course, which is what you would expect. I don't think this is, it sounds quite bizarre, but to even have to explain that. But I think people decided to take that as a literal rule. So people were asking me things like, "So I'm a recovering alcoholic, I can't go to your restaurant." I was going, well, of course you can, and many do, by the way. But there's a sort of etiquette that if you know you're not going to drink wine, you're at least going to eat some food, and I suppose
it's easy for this to come across as you're coming into my restaurant but you're not spending enough, but that's not what you were trying to say, or were you?
No, it's not. It's not about the money, it's about the atmosphere, and it's about an atmosphere of kind of conviviality and sharing and participating. But of course, there is a very hard economic fact that it also is about the money. It's also about the fact that, we hope that we'll make somewhere between £40 to £100 a head on every diner, and if people are coming in and spending £15 or £20, then if everybody does that, then we're in deep trouble. And this restaurant simply can't exist if everybody does that. Other restaurants operate in different ways. Some have a no booking policy, so they turn tables very fast and have queues outside. Other restaurants are very big, so they don't mind if some people aren't spending but other people are. They just want to fill the seats. But this one is very, very small, and we don't want to impose a kind of menu, a set menu or a prefix on people. I don't like that. It's a la carte. You order what you want to order. But there's there's an unwritten rule that you order some food and you drink some wine and you come. But you know, these people have booked this table maybe 2 to 3 weeks in advance. I don't understand why you would book a table 2 or 3 weeks in advance to sit there for 2 hours over a plate of radishes. Like, it just doesn't seem reasonable thing to do. And it's happening, of course, in other restaurants. And you know, perhaps people don't want to rock the boat, but I just thought I should say something about it. I mean, there's other problems, of course, in restaurants. There's no shows as well. There's last minute cancellations, which is pretty much a no-show. I mean, today we had 2 or 3 last minute cancellations, which, you know, these people have held a table for 2 or 3 weeks. I've been saying no to customers for 2 or 3 weeks. Right before service, they phone up and say, actually, we're not coming. And I said, well, that table's gone. Nobody's going to take that table because people assume we're full. So we frantically phone everybody on the list saying, we have a table now, would you like to come? Sometimes people are free, but majority of the time people have already made other plans. So, you know, I think, I suppose it just comes down to manners. I mean, I've never cancelled a table last minute in my life. I've never did a no-show in my life. And every time I go to a restaurant, I go to a restaurant with the attitude that I'm going to eat and drink and I'm going to put some money into the pockets of the people running this place because they deserve it and they're doing a good job. And I'm here to have a good time and you know, throw your best at me, you know.
The outspoken chef and restaurant owner Hugh Corcoran on the responsibility of being a diner and the difference we make as customers, not only to a restaurant's economic success, but also its atmosphere. And Hugh, by the way, is the only chef I've met who can play the accordion to his customers.
Amazing.
There you go.